Today's lesson began Unit 4 on linear equations. We made a foldable, took some notes over how to convert fractions to decimals and decimals to percents to help you make some of the expressions that you're going to have to do a little bit easier. Fractions, decimals, and percents are simply three different ways of writing the same amount. They're all equivalent. And some of them, it would probably be a good idea if you even memorize some really common values, like 3/4. 3/4 as a fraction can also be represented as 75 hundredths, and it can also be represented as 75%. All three of those represent the same amount. 3/4 of a hundredths chart, like you did below, would cover the same amount as 75 hundredths, would show the same thing as 75%. So if they're all equal and you can convert from one to the other, you can make your problems easier by changing them around. If you were given an expression like 5/10 plus 1/8, you can make the process easier by changing them both to fractions or both to decimals. And it's really your choice. Whatever you want to choose to do, you can. So as I've done the work down below, I did them both ways. So if you haven't already tried these, I would like for you to please try them now. And then let's check your work when you finished. So let's start with number 1. You have 64 hundredths minus 2/40. You could convert them both to decimals or both to fractions. I did both. You only need to do one way. 64 hundredths could be written as 64 over 100. The last digit is in the hundredths place, which is how I know that it should be 100 on the bottom. If you're not sure of your place value, you can add the same number of zeros as there are digits behind the decimal point. So you could work 64 hundredths minus 2/40, and that's a perfectly fine way to go. We could take 2/40 and change it to a decimal by taking the numerator, dividing it by the denominator, and you'd get 5 hundredths. Either way is fine, depending on if you want to go the fraction route or the decimal route. First, I'm going to go through the decimal route, I think. Yep. With the decimal, I have 64 hundredths here. I would take away 2/40, which is the same thing as 5 hundredths. You could run it through a calculator. I chose to just go ahead and subtract it the old-fashioned way, and I got 59 hundredths. If you got that, congratulations. Well done. You've put forth the right effort. You've done the correct conversions, and everything's working out great. On the other side here, I did it the fraction way. Instead of writing 64 hundredths as a decimal, I wrote it as a fraction. I'd need to take 2/40 away. Here's where this gets tricky, is now we need a common denominator. So you've got to think about your multiples of 40. There's 40 and 80, and I can't do anything with 100 to make those, and then 120, and then 160, and then 200. I could change these both, because when I make a list of my hundreds, 200 is on both lists. That would be the common denominator that you'd want to change these both to. If you haven't done that and you chose this method, please do it now. In order to change the denominator of 100 to 200, I would need to multiply by 2. And if I need to do that to the denominator, I also have to do it to the numerator. In order to change 40 to 200, this is 40 times 1, 40 times 2, 40 times 3, 40 times 4, 40 times 5. I would need to take 40 times 5 to get 200. So I also need to take the numerator times 5. Once that's been changed, you end up with 128, which is 64 times 2, over 200. 2 times 100. 2 times 5 is 10. 4 times 5 is 200. The denominator stays the same all the way through, and 128 minus 10 is 118. You may realize that 118 over 200 is not in lowest terms, and it needs to be reduced. So you'd need to divide the numerator and the denominator by 2, and you'll see that you get 59 over 100. What's interesting, at least to me, is that that's exactly the same. 59 over 100, written as a decimal, is 59 hundredths. Those both have the same value. They look different, but they have the same value. Let's move on to number 2. We've got a mixture here of decimals and fractions. So I'm going to convert them first. So 5/8 as a decimal would be 65 hundredths. 8/20 as a decimal would be 4/10. And 0.762 would be the same thing as 762 thousandths. Even though that looks like a 6, it's a 0. Thousandths. So your choice. Do you want to go the decimal route or do you want to go the fraction route? I'm going to go the decimal route first. Let's see. How do I want to do this? So I made them all decimals. 5/8 is 625 thousandths, added to the 762 thousandths, minus the 4/10. Now you pick up a calculator and you run it through your calculator, you'll end up with 987 thousandths. If you choose to go the fraction route, that means we've got to change 762 thousandths into a fraction, and it's going to look like this. 5/8 plus 762 thousandths minus 8/20. The trick here is the common denominator. What are you going to use for a common denominator for 8 and 1,000 and 20? The easiest thing to use is 1,000. So 8 would have to be multiplied by, let me check that. You'd multiply the 8 by 125 to get 1,000. So the 5 has to be multiplied by 125, which is where the 625 came from. The middle add-in is fine the way it is. It already has a denominator of 1,000. To change 20 to 1,000, you'd have to multiply by 5. And if that's the case, not by 5, by 50, then I need to do the same thing to the numerator. And 8 times 50 is 400. As you remember, you only do the computation with the numerators. So I would start with my calculator and do 625 plus 762 minus 400 for 897, oops, I left a 0 off, thousandths. That'll be our secret. How's that? Left a 0 off. If you'll jot that down somewhere, left a 0 off. That'll be our secret for this. Okay, so that's the secret. Don't tell me you don't know what it is or I didn't say it or point it out. Left off a 0. That's going to be our secret. All right. Next section. You had the picture. You were to write the fraction, the decimal, and the percent. I know that this was hard to read, so if you didn't get it down in class, there are 44 here shaded, and there are 100 in all. So you need to write that as a fraction, as a decimal, and as a percent. You need to use your flip book to check and see how to do those. So for the first one, the fraction would be 44 over 100. It could reduce to 22 over 50 by dividing by 2. And thanks to Blake, I forgot that I could divide again. He showed me his and helped me correct it. So when I divide again by 2, you end up with 11 over 25 in lowest terms. All three of those fractions are different ways of representing the same value. 44 over 100 is the same thing as the decimal, 0.44. The way to figure that out is to take 44 and divide it by 100. In order to change it to a percent, you take the decimal and move the decimal point 2 places to the right and add on the percent sign. For the next one, you were given 1800s. You should have written 1800s as 18%. Moving that decimal point 2 places to the right, sticking on the percent sign. You should have written it as a fraction, 18 over 100. If you divide the top and the bottom by 2, you can reduce that to 9/50ths. And then finally, you should have shaded in the hundreds chart. That's 10. That's 8 more for 18. You could have done it vertically. You could have done it in the middle. As long as you have 18 boxes shaded, we're in good shape. All right. For the next one, you were given 38%. In order to change 38% to a decimal, you drop the decimal point. You drop the percent sign. The decimal's after the 8. You move it 2 places to the left, and it's 0 and 3800ths. Once you have it written as 0 and 3800ths, you can write it as a fraction. 38 over 100, divide both the top and the bottom by 2, and it'll reduce to 19 over 50. So now we need to shade it, and we need to color in 19. I'm going to go vertically this time. A whole row's 10, and then 9 in another row. So now we've got the visual representation of the fraction, the percent, and the decimal. One more to go. The last one is 8400ths. You can divide 84 and 100 by 4 and reduce that to 21 over 25. If you take 21 over 25 and divide it, you'll get 0 and 8400ths. And if you move the decimal point 2 places, you'll get 84%. And then for this one, we need to shade 8 rows. Means 2 are going to be left unshaded. Isn't this cool? I found a crayon button. I love this. I didn't even know this existed till today. Happy New Year to me. And 4 in the next column. What's shaded now is 8400ths, 0.84, or 84%. We'll practice this some more in class tomorrow, but if you've got this down, watch the video, gone through and done the practice, your practice in class tomorrow should be no sweat. See you then.